You'll see this is kind of like a trail where you know which way to walk in there.
Everything's like got thorns too, huh?
Everything's got thorns. And I think the difference is people hear desert landscape and they almost think that it's nothing but sand and you could see so this is basically the brush.
They did not find Nancy first. They found what was left of a signal, a small, titanium-cased device buried in the desert miles east of Tucson, beneath dry soil and the kind of silence that only exists where no one is supposed to be. It was not dropped. It was not lost. It had been placed there, and the question of how it arrived in that spot, separated from the body it was designed to keep alive, is where this investigation truly begins. That device was Nancy G's pacemaker. And the fact that it was found outside of her body tells investigators something that no witness statement ever could. Nancy G was 84 years old. She had lived in the same neighborhood on the outskirts of Tucson long enough that her neighbors could set their clocks by her. Morning medication at 7:30. Afternoon calls with family. Church on Sundays. Lights out before 10. She was the kind of person whose presence was felt most clearly in the moments when the routine held, and whose absence, when it finally came,
It was found. We now found out that it's not linked to the case. The DNA actually traced back to a restaurant worker in the area who the sheriff says has absolutely nothing to do with the case.
was felt like a door slamming shut in an otherwise quiet house. She lived alone. She was financially stable. She had a pacemaker that monitored her heart rhythm continuously, logging data, tracking movement, recording the body's most intimate signals in real time. That device was not optional for Nancy. It was the mechanism keeping her alive. What investigators would later discover is that whoever was in that house on the night of February 1st understood that. February 1st did not arrive without warning. 2 weeks before that night, something had shifted in Nancy's world. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way that significant things often begin. Quietly, she had started asking questions about her finances. Not accusations, not confrontations. Just quiet observations. Small withdrawals she could not account for.
Nancy's home. We saw deputies roll up a couple of hours ago. They were here for about an hour, and what's interesting is they went to the back side of the house, Natasha. They opened up a cap in the ground, and they went into what we believe
transfers that did not look right. A general sense that the numbers were not matching the explanations she had been given. She scheduled a meeting with her attorney for February 3rd. That meeting never took place. In the weeks before February 1st, those closest to Nancy were aware that she was paying closer attention to her financial situation. What that scrutiny would have meant for certain individuals in her life, individuals with close access to her home, her finances, and her trust, remains one of the central questions in this case. Nancy's family describes her as sharp, warm but sharp, the kind of person who noticed things and, once she noticed them, did not let them go. Her church attendance was consistent. Her relationship with her children and grandchildren was a point of genuine pride. She was not someone who existed at the edges of her own life. She was present. She was engaged. She was, by every account from those who knew her,
to the house. I don't think anybody's been searching there, and that is the perfect thing to do grid searches there in particular quadrants where everybody...
Someone who still had a great deal of living to do, which is why the events of February 1st carry the weight that they do. Hi viewers, quick question before we continue. When you look at your daily routine, how many people in your life actually know your schedule well enough to predict your every move? Drop your answer in the comments below. Now, back to the evening of February 1st. 8:42 in the evening, Nancy's pacemaker recorded something that was not part of her normal baseline data. An abnormal spike in heart rhythm, sudden, not gradual. The kind of reading that does not come from stress alone or from simply standing up too fast. 5 minutes later, at 8:47, the device logged rapid physical movement. Not the slow, measured movement of someone walking through a familiar home. Something faster. Something that the data would later suggest was involuntary. By 52 p.m., the device registered acute cardiac distress. Within that same minute, within seconds of that distress reading, a smart home speaker inside the house activated.
This came as a surprise. I raced over there. They were there for 3 hours. We saw 3 deputies get out of a car. They went into the house and they were doing some kind of evidence processing.
It had detected a sound, a voice, and the word that was captured by that device, the single word recorded in the audio log of that system, was one word. Please. That is the only word on record from inside that house that night. Investigators returned to that moment repeatedly throughout the course of this case. Not because it answered questions, but because of how precisely it raised them. A person does not say please into the silence of an empty room. That word requires an audience. It requires someone present to receive it. The pacemaker kept recording. At 9:30 p.m., the signal stopped. Not a low battery warning. Not a gradual decline. Complete stop. Pacemakers are not designed to simply go quiet. They are built with redundancies, with fail-safes, with the specific engineering purpose of continuing to function when the body around them is struggling. A pacemaker going completely silent at 9:30 p.m. is not a technical malfunction. It is an event. And events, in the language of forensic investigation, require causes. What investigators were now looking at was a 48-minute window, from 8:42, when the data first turned unusual, to 9:30, when it stopped entirely. That told a story no witness had yet told them. But that was only the first layer. Because at 9:29 p.m., 1 minute before the pacemaker went silent, someone accessed the home security system. The password was entered correctly. Not guessed, not forced, entered by someone who knew it. And immediately after access was granted, the security cameras were switched into maintenance mode, a deliberate setting that disables active recording. In any other context, that might look like routine system maintenance. In the context of what the pacemaker had just recorded, it looked like something else entirely. No windows had been forced. No locks had been broken. There was no sign of any physical breach at any entry point. Whoever was inside that house at 8:52 p.m., when the device logged the word, please, was not someone who had broken in. They were someone who already had access. That single fact changed the entire shape of the investigation. At 9:22 p.m., a motion sensor inside the garage had been triggered. At 9:41 p.m., 11 minutes after the pacemaker went permanently silent, 12 minutes after the cameras went dark, a vehicle left the driveway. Investigators reviewed the data on that exit. The vehicle did not leave quickly. There was no sign of urgency in the movement, no indication of someone fleeing in panic. It left the way a person leaves when they believe they have time. Not one call was made to emergency services that night. No ambulance was requested. No neighbors were alerted. No one inside or immediately outside that property made any attempt to summon help. Not at 8:52 when the cardiac distress was recorded, not at 9:30 when the signal stopped, not at 9:41 when the vehicle pulled away. In the timeline of events that investigators were reconstructing from device data, that absence of action is not a small detail. It is a defining one. If Nancy had been in distress, and the data from her own pacemaker indicates clearly that she was, why did no one call for help? That question would follow this case from its earliest stages into its most current developments. Around that same evening, before the distress readings began, a prepaid phone had placed a call to Nancy's home. The call lasted 14 seconds. That is not a full conversation. That is barely a confirmation. Investigators would later trace the movement of that prepaid phone through cell tower data and find that after the call was placed, the device moved east of Tucson, toward a remote stretch of desert where traffic was sparse and the nearest neighbor was far enough away that no one would notice a car parked along the roadside. 10:05 p.m., that prepaid phone registered as active near that remote location. At 10:12 p.m., a second Bluetooth-capable device was detected in the same area. 2 devices, 2 separate signals, 1 location. The data suggested, with the kind of specificity that is very difficult to dismiss, that 2 individuals were present at that site after 10 p.m. on the night Nancy disappeared. Not one person acting alone. 2. Investigators deployed search teams to that stretch of desert. Cadaver dogs were brought in. The animals alerted in a specific location. When the soil in that area was examined closely, There was evidence of recent disturbance, ground that had been moved and resettled. Fibers were recovered. Forensic analysis identified them as consistent with a moving blanket. And then, beneath the disturbed soil, investigators found the pacemaker. Nancy's pacemaker, removed, separated from her body, buried in the desert east of Tucson. A pacemaker is not a surface-level medical device. It is implanted. It sits inside the body, connected directly to the heart through leads that are threaded into the cardiac tissue itself. The removal of a pacemaker outside of a clinical setting is not something that happens accidentally. It is not something that happens incidentally. It requires intent, and it requires action, deliberate, focused action carried out with a specific purpose. And investigators understood immediately what that purpose was. As long as the pacemaker was inside Nancy's body, it was logging. Every spike, every movement, every timestamp was preserved in its internal memory. The device had already recorded the spike at 8:42, the movement at 8:47, the distress at 8:52, and the single word captured by the smart speaker at the moment of that distress. The pacemaker was not just a medical device. It had become a witness. Removing it stopped the data record. It removed the physiological timeline from the equation. Or at least, that is what someone may have believed it would do. What it actually did was give investigators one of the most telling pieces of evidence in the entire case. Because a pacemaker does not end up buried in a desert by accident. It does not remove itself. It does not travel. Its presence in that location, outside of Nancy's body, at that specific distance from her home, with that specific collection of surrounding forensic evidence, does not have an innocent explanation. And investigators, as they stood over that recovery site, understood that the search for Nancy G. had just fundamentally changed in nature. Weeks after the disappearance, after weeks of public silence, the individual who had been identified as the primary person of interest in this investigation made a statement. He did not provide a complete account of the evening, but he said enough to alter the course of the investigation. He confirmed he had been inside the house that night, and he said she was not alone. That statement, 4 words in particular, confirmed 2 things that investigators had already suspected from the data: that he was present and that someone else was with them. It connected the 2 device evidence from the desert to the events inside the home. It placed a second individual inside the timeline in a way that the cell tower and Bluetooth data had already pointed toward, but that no statement had yet confirmed. Nancy G. has not been found. The investigation remains open. The search continues. Evidence is still being processed. And in the background of every development in this case, 2 pieces of information remain constant. The data from a pacemaker, logging in real time from inside a woman's chest, recorded the exact moment the night went wrong. And the word it captured, a single word, pressed into the memory of a smart device in a quiet house on the outskirts of Tucson, was please. Somewhere between 8:42 p.m. and 10:12 p.m., the truth of what happened to Nancy G. was written. Not in a statement, not in a confession, not in anything a person chose to say, but in data, in timestamps, in signals sent automatically by a device that had no reason to lie. The investigation is not over, and neither is the question that sits at the center of it. If she was in distress, why did no one call for help? If you are watching this and that question stays with you, it should. Because it is the same question that Nancy's family has been asking since February 2nd. And it is the question that, when someone finally answers it honestly, will be the moment this case breaks wide open. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications right now, because the next case coming to this channel is one you do not want to miss. True stories, real timelines, real consequences. Cases that challenge what you think you know about the people closest to us. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and more than once on this channel, a viewer's observation has opened up a conversation worth having. The data does not forget, and neither do we. The pacemaker had already told investigators more than any witness had. But the data did not stop at the moment of distress. It kept pointing forward, outward, toward decisions made after 8:52 p.m. that no device recorded by accident. Consider what that timeline actually means. At 8:42 p.m., Nancy's device registered an abnormal cardiac event. 5 minutes later, it logged rapid physical movement. 5 minutes after that, acute distress. And within that same minute, a voice-activated speaker captured one word. Please. That word is directed. It assumes someone present is receiving it. It assumes that person has a choice, and that Nancy was asking them to make a different one. The smart speaker logged it at 8:52 p.m. The pacemaker went permanently silent at 9:30 p.m. 38 minutes between a recorded plea and the end of a signal designed never to stop. In those 38 minutes, not one call was placed to emergency services. No neighbor was alerted. No alarm triggered. The house stayed completely quiet from the outside, and inside, the only record of what was happening came from a device embedded in Nancy's chest. Pacemakers do not simply go quiet. They are built with redundancies and fail-safes specifically engineered to keep functioning when the body around them is struggling. A complete signal stop at 9:30 p.m. is not a technical malfunction. It is an event, and events require causes. What made the pacemaker data particularly significant was its independence. Could not be edited remotely, could not be deleted from the outside. Whatever it recorded on February 1st was stored permanently, until the device itself was removed from the body. That detail matters. Remember it. At 9:29 p.m., 1 minute before the signal ended, someone accessed the home security system. The correct password was entered, not guessed, not forced, entered by someone who already knew it. Immediately after, the cameras were placed into maintenance mode, a deliberate setting that disables active recording without triggering any external alert. Maintenance mode is not something a person stumbles onto while panicking. It requires navigating a specific menu inside a familiar interface. Whoever selected it had used that system before. No windows had been forced, no locks broken, no sign of any entry by someone who did not belong there. The person inside that house at 8:52 p.m., the person Nancy said, please to, already had access. At 9:22 p.m., a garage motion sensor registered activity. At 9:41 p.m., a vehicle left the driveway. Not quickly, not erratically, calmly, the way a person moves when they believe they have time. 50 minutes had passed since Nancy's distress was first recorded. No call for help had been made at any point during those 50 minutes. Not when the cardiac event began. Not when the single word was captured. Not when the signal stopped. Not when the vehicle pulled away. That absence of action is one of the most significant behavioral facts in this entire investigation. The investigation moved outward from the house, following the data east, toward a stretch of desert where traffic after dark was close to nothing and the nearest structure too far away to matter. But before the desert, there was a phone call. Earlier that evening, before the 8:42 distress reading, a prepaid phone had called Nancy's home. The call lasted 14 seconds. 14 seconds is not a conversation. It is not a check-in. It is the length of time it takes to say 1 or 2 sentences and receive a response. Investigators saw it for what the data suggested, a confirmation, a point of coordination set against the backdrop of an evening already moving toward something. The phone was not registered. After the call, it moved. Not back into the city, not into any residential area, but east, toward the desert, toward the kind of isolated terrain where no one asks questions after dark. At 10:05 p.m., that prepaid phone registered as active near a specific remote location east of Tucson. At 10:12 p.m., a second Bluetooth-capable device was detected at the same location. 2 devices, different signals, same site, 7 minutes apart. After 10 p.m., on the same night Nancy's pacemaker had gone permanently silent. The data placed 2 people there, not one. That distinction matters enormously. A single individual acting alone carries one set of implications. 2 individuals coordinated, present at the same remote site after the same sequence of events, that carries a different weight entirely. points toward prior communication, toward the 14-second call, toward a plan that had been set in motion before 8:42 p.m. Investigators deployed search teams to that desert location. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Their response was immediate and specific, not a broad sweep of terrain but a focus point. A point where the soil showed evidence of recent human disturbance. Forensic teams recovered fibers from the disturbed area. Analysis identified them as consistent with a moving blanket, thick, padded material used to keep items contained and concealed during transport. And beneath the soil, they found the pacemaker, Nancy's pacemaker, removed, miles from her home. This is a surgically implanted device. It connects to the heart through leads threaded carefully into the cardiac muscle. Its removal outside of any clinical setting is not a reaction to a crisis. It is not something that happens by accident or in confusion. It is a deliberate act, carried out with a specific understanding of what that act would accomplish. Investigators identified that purpose immediately. As long as the pacemaker remained inside Nancy's body, its internal memory was intact. The 8:42 spike, the 8:47 movement, the 8:52 distress, every timestamp, every reading, all of it recoverable, all of it usable as evidence. Removing the device was an attempt to remove that record. The attempt did not succeed. The device was found. The memory was recoverable. And what investigators now held was the most complete physiological account of Nancy's final recorded hours. A medical timeline that someone had tried to leave in the desert, waiting to disappear. It had not disappeared. It had waited to be found. Weeks passed. Evidence was processed. The investigation expanded. And through all of it, the individual at the center of this case, the person with the security code, the access, the financial connection, the presence in the home that the device data had already established, said nothing publicly. Then he spoke. It was not a full account. It was not a confession. But it was enough. He confirmed he had been inside the house that night. And he said 4 words that changed the structure of the investigation in a way that no forensic recovery had done on its own. She was not alone. For investigators who had been tracking 2 devices to a desert location since the first week of the case, those words were not a surprise. They were a confirmation, a voluntary statement placing a second individual inside the timeline, the second device, the second signal, the second person at the remote site at 10:12 p.m. now carried the weight of something the primary person of interest had chosen to say out loud. Data shows what happened. A statement, even a partial one, begins to show who was there when it happened. The financial thread of this case had never left the foreground. Nancy had scheduled a meeting with her attorney for February 3rd. The focus of that meeting, based on what family and associates described, was the financial irregularities she had quietly been tracking for 2 weeks. Small withdrawals, transfers that did not align with what she had been told, numbers that did not match the explanations she had been given. The meeting never happened. The individual who had access to her finances, her home, and her security system was placed inside that house on the night her pacemaker stopped transmitting. The attorney meeting that could have produced significant consequences for anyone managing her accounts was scheduled for 48 hours after she disappeared. Investigators were not treating the financial angle as secondary. They were treating it as motive. And when motive, opportunity, and a near-complete forensic timeline align in a single case, that alignment becomes the foundation on which everything else is built. Nancy's family continued to speak publicly throughout this period. Her daughter's statements shifted over the months, from grief and confusion in February to the kind of focused, directed pressure that emerges when a family stops waiting and starts demanding. That shift in tone is something investigators note. It changes the public climate around a case. It creates a different kind of weight for anyone holding information they have not yet disclosed. Because in cases involving more than one person, silence is rarely permanent. 2 people sharing knowledge of what happened do not typically maintain identical silence indefinitely. The ongoing investigation, the public attention, the family statements, the forensic disclosures, all of it accumulates. And the partial statement that had already emerged, she was not alone, was not a closed door. It was the first crack. Cracks do not usually stop at 1. Nancy G. has not been found. That is the most important sentence in this case. Not because it is the most dramatic, but because it is the one fact that everything else is still working toward. The data is nearly complete. The behavioral timeline is nearly unbroken. The pacemaker has been recovered. 2 individuals have been placed, through device records and a partial voluntary statement, in the locations that matter most. The financial records Nancy had been quietly reviewing are part of the evidentiary scope. The attorney who was scheduled to meet with her on February 3rd has been in contact with investigators. And still, Nancy has not been found. Her family lives inside that absence every day. The public requests have moved beyond appeals. They are demands now for answers, for location, for the basic information that a family is owed when someone they love disappears. And those demands are directed not just at investigators, but, through cameras and press statements, at anyone who might know something they have not yet said. That last group matters more than people often realize. Information in cases like this rarely stays contained only to those directly involved. The specific weight of knowing what happened to a missing person, and carrying that knowledge through months of public coverage, tends to show in ways that are difficult to fully control. Details shift slightly between tellings. Timelines develop small inconsistencies. The thing a person avoids mentioning becomes, over time, the most visible gap in everything they do say. Investigators understand this. They are watching for it. The forensic evidence in this case is not going to change. The pacemaker logged what it logged. The cell towers recorded what they recorded. The smart speaker captured what was spoken in that room at 8:52 p.m. None of that evidence adjusts to accommodate a more convenient account. Any statement that either individual eventually makes, whether tomorrow or a year from now, will be measured against a data record that has already been fully established. That is the nature of digital evidence in a modern investigation. It does not wait. It does not forget. It sits exactly where it was recorded, permanent and specific, ready to be placed next to whatever account someone decides to offer. The search for Nancy has continued beyond the initial desert recovery. Areas east of Tucson corresponding to the cell data from February 1st have been mapped and re-examined. Additional forensic analysis of the recovered fibers, the pacemaker casing, and the surrounding soil composition is ongoing. The goal is not only to build a stronger evidentiary case. The goal is to bring Nancy home. That is the part of this investigation that data cannot complete alone. Data can place devices, can timestamp events. It can reconstruct a sequence with a precision that human memory rarely achieves. But it cannot physically locate a missing person. Only human beings carry that information. And in this case, at least 2 of them do. Nancy G. was 84 years old. She had a schedule her neighbors knew by heart. She had a family she spoke to every afternoon. She had a meeting with her attorney in 2 days that she had been building toward quietly, carefully, for 2 weeks. And she had a pacemaker that recorded, in exact timestamps, the last hour of data her body ever produced. At 8:52 p.m. on February 1st, in the middle of whatever was happening in that house, she said one word to whoever was standing in front of her. Please. That word did not change what happened, but it remained, stored in a device, preserved in a log, recovered by investigators who were looking for exactly that kind of evidence. The kind that no one thinks to destroy because no one realizes it was captured. The truth of what happened to Nancy that night is already documented. Investigators hold most of it. What they are still working toward, what her family is still waiting for, is the answer that only a location can provide. That search is not over. If this case stayed with you, if the timeline, the data, or the questions still open at the end of this kept your attention, share your thoughts in the comments. This channel is built for people who follow the details. Your observations matter here. Subscribe and turn on notifications right now. The next case on this channel carries the same weight. A real investigation, real evidence, and questions that deserve real attention. Do not miss it. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and pass this along to someone who needs to hear it. The data does not forget, and neither do we.